Hey everyone, Jefrey Expression here, and welcome back to our community events where we help you learn more about journey mapping and CX in general from industry experts. Expression is an online collaborative tool that can help you visualize your customer journeys, create personas and network maps, and invite teammates to collaborate with you in real time. With that, let's get started.
So thank you so much to UX Presia for hosting this event and for hosting similar events. As we saw in the chat in the initial comments that we were gathering, learning is such an important part of being a UX designer, and having communities of practice and access to events really do bring people together. It allows us to continue, not only practice continuous learning, but to ensure that we are bringing a community of practice together. So I'll have a gentle reminder at the end, but really today's journey is one journey, and it is a conversation among, I hope, many conversations to come, not just with myself, but with all of the community with the whole community that we are building in UX design, in sustainable design. And so if you hear something interesting today, and you want to ask a question at the end, that's fantastic. If you're somebody who needs to think on things before you want to ask a question, and you want to take the time and the space to think your questions through, that's also okay. Feel free to reach out and engage as you need to. So this is a standing invitation to join me and my community of practice in my design practice. I hope you join this practice, and that you learn some things today that you want to ask questions about. So without further ado, let's jump into doing different. So do different, lessons learned from the pain and joy points of a UX designer. So as is good practice, I think it's always not only a good idea to start looking at my own thinking and looking at others' thinking, but I love good ideas. And so this is starting us off on I think a fairly positive note with a good idea from no small mind here, Galileo Galilei. All truths are easy to understand once they are discovered. The point is to discover them. So as UX designers, I think that many of us and UX researchers, I'm using the word UX designer here to encompass designers, researchers, those of us who work in the space of user interface design. The point being, those of us who are in this space of trying to understand user experiences are fundamentally trying to discover truths about how people work, how people use products and services, and hopefully coming up with and discovering some new opportunities to create and enhance and improve the things that are out in the world so that they are more accessible to the people who use them, that they provide, that we are providing, and that they are getting a better experience because of our interventions and the things that we put out. So at the end of the day, I really see in this statement an opportunity to put not only our questions hat on, but also to practice humility, because at the end of the day, there are so many questions out there that we need to keep asking and we need to keep looking for. And if we start from the space of, do we have the best question in front of us to solve right now, we're going to use our time much better. And we're going to see more about that idea later on in the presentation, but that is to say that please, when I say that, or encourage you to ask questions, not only of me, but of the world around you. This is an open invitation to keep asking why. Put on your, the ever engaged 4-year-old mindset of, why is this the way it is? Because by asking why, we learn a lot. And it should come as no surprise then that this question of why are things the way they are has been a question that has energized and really fostered my engagement, not only throughout my whole career, but my whole life. I am a scientist at heart. I have been doing research without a joke, my earliest UX research projects were around the time I was 10 or 11 years old, and I was trying to understand the ethnographic perspective of people with specifically fibromyalgia. And so I wanted to understand what it was like to experience the world with a chronic pain disorder. And so I went out and I interviewed people, and I learned a lot of things that I didn't understand because that wasn't my experience in the world. And I was able to create some recommendations. Yes, they were only featured at the time in my local science fair. But that being said, this definitely propelled me to continue asking questions and continue talking to people in spaces that I didn't have necessarily firsthand experience with, but I was very, very curious to learn more about. So as a scientist and as a cognitive scientist specifically, I have specialized in decision making and system design, culture, and trying to understand how it is that people work well together. How can we make better decisions and effective decisions? There are a lot of stumbling blocks, but a lot of opportunities in how our cognition is designed. If we better understand how our cognition is designed, we can work more effectively with it. So this is why, at the end of the day, it's about neurodiversity. No one here is going to come to the same table with the same brain as anybody else. If you understand your own neurocognitive system, you're going to be a better designer at the end of the day. So this talk is part of a much larger project that I am doing around behavioral hacks for understanding how to work well with your cognition. And so when it comes down to it, if you understand your system, you're going to be better able to be a better UX designer. So a question that is at the top of my mind right now is, how can we build future effectiveness into our everyday decisions and actions? So many of us have goals and many of us have things that we want to accomplish, but why is it that we don't necessarily achieve those goals? And it's not for necessarily a lack of motivation, although that could be the explanation. It isn't necessarily for a lack of goodwill or hope, or it's complex. The answer is it's highly complex. And so if we can start to unpack some of that complexity, understand our systems better, understand our user systems better, if we aim to understand, we will be able to better build and design in a sustainable way. So today's talk is going to walk us through 3 fundamental pieces that have informed not only my own user experience journey or my own experience as a user experience designer, and my own experiences as a practitioner and a researcher in the field. It's also going to inform how my experiences have informed who I am and how I practice today. So when I think about and look back on my journey and how I've got here, I've learned a lot of lessons. And I hope that I'm not here to give you advice. I'm here to share my story. And if in my story you hear something that sparks with you and you're like, I'm making similar, or I'm experiencing similar barriers, or I'm experiencing similar challenges, there is something in my story that will help you to maybe make things a little less effortful in your own practice. And so the 3 milestones or 3 landmarks in this journey are going to be foundational understanding, a story, and some lessons learned around show, don't tell accountability. And finally, we're going to end at the story that is nearest to where I am today, which is around sustainable design leadership. And in each of these stories, I believe fundamentally in setting our expectations. And so when it comes to it, what should you expect in each of these stories, and how can you hope to effectively navigate the space well? Well, you should expect to see that we're going to present a new concept, And you're going to get to think about that, and hopefully it's going to challenge some existing thinking you have. Maybe it's going to challenge some existing beliefs. Maybe it's going to force you to look at things a little differently. And if so, good. You should be a little uncomfortable today. If we're uncomfortable, we have the opportunity for growth. If we shy away from discomfort, then we are avoiding the opportunity to learn something new. I'm going to give you a story that shows why this concept matters in practice. And when I say that the story is based on my experiences, it has been entirely it has been anonymized for privacy reasons. I have stripped away details. I may be making some slight modifications to protect privacy. That is very, very fundamental to how I work. I believe very much in my users' privacy and my clients' privacy. But that being said, I'll be staying close enough to what happened in these stories to inform what it is that you need to know and why this concept matters. So following this story, we are going to talk about what are some of my current practices. And then we're going to look at two concepts. How to do different today based off of what I'm doing, maybe something you can take away for yourself. And then finally, how to do different long-term. So these are, when I talk about doing different today, we're talking about behavioral change, we're talking about habit formation, and hopefully you'll be able to see results in as little as 3 to 6 weeks. But fundamentally, behavioral change does require sustained effort. So if you want to maintain results, you're looking at a long-term commitment. But if you really want to get the best results for any behavioral change, you should be looking at putting in some systematic or procedural or process change as well. So let's take a look at what that's going to look like with our first example. Foundational understanding, our first landmark on our journey into my UX journey. So the 3 things that you need to take away here is that a foundational understanding, from my perspective, is not only about knowing your user, it's about knowing yourself. And we spend a lot of time getting to know our users. And well, hopefully we're spending a lot of time getting to know our users. That being said, many of us have probably heard the term UX theater, or the concept of creating personas or fictional characters that really don't speak for a real lived set of experiences or a real user. But that being said, that is an example of maybe not best practices, arguably some poor practice in UX design. But most of us understand that there's value in reaching out to and understanding and hearing our users, and hopefully looking to, as much as and as often as possible, hearing their stories in their words and from their perspective, and really learning from what it is that they have to say. That being said, a key part of doing this well from a cognitive perspective is starting from a foundation of knowing yourself, knowing your own story, knowing your own biases and how those biases show up, and knowing how those biases inform how you interact with other people. So starting from a self-knowledge, moving to a perspective of appreciating system complexity. So what does that mean? It means that not only are you a person working with or trying to create products and services with and for users, but you're also embedded in a complex system. So by understanding how that system informs your behavior, it informs their behavior, you're going to create products and services that work well. So why does this matter? So I'm going to tell you a story of a junior level user experience designer. This person is about late 20s. They're very enthusiastic. They have a high degree of passion for problem solving, and they love what it is that they do. So I'm calling this persona the all-in researcher. This person is very much a believer that problem solving is not only a worthwhile skill, but by solving good problems, we bring good answers to the table, and that there are often even complex and wicked problems and wicked challenges. If you work at them long enough, you're going to come up with an answer. So this is a dedicated, passionate person, probably with a fair degree of enthusiasm, and somebody who may be quite serious, in fact, very serious about the problem in front of them because they're solving very serious problems. And so that's the all-in researcher. So this person was tasked with enhancing a process that was fairly complex. It was a planning process that impacted a full organization with multiple departments. Approximately 10 to 15,000 people were impacted by the results of this process. And so the first thing that they did when they started working through it was that they had to understand what was in front of them, what was the system. Went out and did a bunch of interviews, and they were tasked with this. They were ready to go. So they had a series of interviews, and one of the second or third interviews that they did was after the director, following the data expert on the file. They met with the main responsible manager for the process, and they gung-ho, the all-in researcher, went into this meeting and said, I think I have a very good idea of why you have so many challenges in this process, and I am so ready to help you solve those challenges. I'm ready to help you fix those problems. And what the researcher was met with was immediate defensiveness. There's nothing, I'm being voluntold, I have to work with you on this. I don't think there's anything, my process works fine. So right there, by coming in excited to solve problems and ready to help this person fix their process, this communication approach effectively shut down the communication before it came in, or before the conversation could really even get started. So what was at play here from a cognitive perspective? Well, one of the things was confirmation bias. So yes, I've been the all-in researcher, but that person had been told that the process wasn't working, and could see already just after one or two conversations that there were problems. And so I was creating this idea that there was, in fact, an issue with the process. And so I looked for more signals that it wasn't working. And for those of you who aren't familiar with confirmation bias is an idea that's been around for almost 65 years, 66 years approximately. It was an idea that was introduced by Jack Braham in 1956. And it's an idea that basically, and I love how Robert Davies, this quote is from Roberts and Davies, the eyes sees only what the mind is prepared to comprehend. So what does this mean? This means that if you have an idea that something's broken, for example, you will look for signs that it is in fact broken. If you believe all is good, you're going to look for signs that confirm that it is in fact good. You tend to disregard more readily things that don't conform to your view of the world, the beliefs you have, the things you believe to be true. So if I come in with the idea that this is a problem that needs to be solved, I'm very much going to look for further signs that this is a problem and that it is maybe even arguably a broken process, rather than also approaching it from the perspective that maybe there are some things that work. If I had approached it from the perspective, instead of jumping in to just solve the problem and look for the things that were not working, maybe I would have had a better first conversation with this primary process owner. So what are some of my current practices that I do instead? Now, today, the all-in researcher has a much more patient and I will call it cautious approach. It's not to say risk averse. No, it's practicing some caution from the perspective of, I want to do my own homework to better understand, especially the key stakeholders prior to advancing. I want to do some of that work to understand, especially with an internal process, what are some of the existing assumptions? Even before I have that primary meeting with a client, I'm doing some of that work to unpack my own biases and understanding, how am I seeing this problem? If I'm seeing this as, a highly painful process, I'm going to approach my communication. I'm going to approach the problem differently than if I'm coming in with the perspective of seeing opportunities as well as challenges. And so this is about self and interpersonal management. Foundational understanding is about understanding that we are often, especially when we're talking about internal process and internal service design, we are users of the products and services we're using. Even when we are not talking about an internal process or process design, if it is a product that exists in the world, we may be using that product. If it is a service, we're looking at things like healthcare services, or we're looking at governmental services. You're talking about things that definitely have an impact on you. So understanding how you yourself relate to that service, relate to that product, you're going to have a much more honest accounting. And you're going to be able to potentially avoid some landmines and some resistance that when you communicate with others, when you try to bring them in, come in with questions first. Come in with a perspective of, I'm leading with questions and curiosity. So you may have some understanding, assumptions. So I've heard some things. For example, I've heard that this may be a challenging process. I would like to understand how the process is working from your perspective. I'm not here to fix your process. I'm here to work with you if you see there's an opportunity in enhancing this process. This is, and there are ways that you could even frame it probably even more. If you're trying to increase openness, you focus on really, like, I want to understand how you relate, how we relate to this problem together. And if there is even in fact a problem. So if you are somebody who is a very devout problem solver, you perhaps don't necessarily check even that bias in and of itself. You want to see problems in places, because if you're a problem solver, having problems to solve makes you feel valued. It makes you feel like you are doing something good. So coming even in with the question of, is this the problem to solve right now, allows for you to do some of that unpacking. And we're going to talk later on about prioritization. This is going to play a really good role in informing how to do some prioritization as well. Finally, one of the mindset shifts that we need to consider here is about moving from being effective, moving towards being effective versus being right. Anybody here who has worked as an expert or who has spent a lot of time developing their practice, you don't necessarily have to identify as an expert to feel like, well, I believe I have the right answer here. And you know what? The person sitting across from the all-in researcher on that day also believed they had the right answer. They had been able to deliver their process year after year. They were getting some results. So from their perspective, they were right. Well, if we're all running around trying to be right, we may not get very much done. So moving and trying to shift towards a perspective of how are we going to work together effectively can not only make it a much easier time to get work done together, but also at the end of the day, maybe that first step towards creating openness in a more resistant client. So what could you do different today? If you haven't already, I would highly recommend doing a bias check. So identify how is confirmation bias impacting you? How does it impact your ability to empower others? For example, if you want to empower your client to participate well in your initial discussion, understanding how not only confirmation bias, but other potential biases you have impact and influence and take away from your ability to be effective, you will be better able to work with your biases. And I want to be very direct here and say we often have a very pejorative understanding of cognitive bias. It literally is in the name bias. It's not a good thing. It doesn't sound like a good thing. Our cognition is set up the way it is. And those biases often serve the things we call cognitive biases are basically mental cognitive heuristics or shortcuts that make us much better able to navigate the space in a timely and responsive way. So confirmation bias, it often works, but just knowing it's there does allow us to unpack and be more effective at understanding where it may lead us to some tripping points or pitfalls that we could otherwise avoid. So yeah, it actually can make us quite effective, but sometimes it can also lead to us running into a meeting, all hands in, ready to go, ready to solve the world, when all you needed instead was to put a little bit more caution in, go in with some looking for understanding, and approach it from a perspective of questions. And by so doing, make it that you're going to actually have a pretty positive first conversation. And I've done that many times since, and it has worked much better. Another thing that you can do for long term is to look at adopting a process or a practice of failing. So when we find ourselves falling into the trap of being right, often it's coming from a perspective of potentially insecurity, or maybe you have some discomfort around failing. So you tend to go to the things that make you more comfortable or the things that you're more likely to be successful in. So people who do tend to identify as experts tend to do just this. They're like, I'm really good at this, so I'm going to go down the path of continuing things that I'm already really good at. So if you adopt something like, practicing in a second language or a third language or a fourth language, depending on how many languages you already have, you will find if you're somebody who doesn't pick up languages easily, you may fail quite a lot, but you will actually be able to extend your cognitive flexibility, and it's going to help you to be more comfortable with not always winning or being right, and it's going to increase your self and other compassion. So if you're interested in this, like there's some work out there on fail practices that I would highly recommend checking out, and other ways of framing it that if you want to check this out for yourself include just looking into how to learn to like or arguably even love failing, because it means you're learning. So moving on from that first landmark, foundational understanding, we move into our second landmark. Our destination, or rather on our destination, is show, don't tell accountability. This piece is around designing feasible and timely wins that matter to, and this part is very important, real people. This is about looking for solutions that are going to work in real time, are going to address real problems, and this is the most important part, are going to be, in the best case scenarios, co-designed and co-created with the people that are impacted or going to be using those products and services. This is really about building bridges and closing divides. So if you want people to use your products, if you want people to use your services, don't come to them at the last minute and ask them to say, was this good? or does this work for you? Instead, ask them to come to the table when you're still asking questions. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about why this matters. So I was working with a user divided client. This was again an um, internal process, very large scale, high degree of scrutiny in the process, and it was not performing well. Like, the numbers were there. We could arguably point to the numbers and say the fact that the rejection rates were as high as they were, the amount of people who were successfully processed through on the first go was less than 15%. And when you look at that number, you know that there's something that isn't working well. And having learned lessons from earlier in their career, the all-in researcher came in with an attitude of much greater foundational understanding. But they were working in this case with a client who wasn't necessarily reluctant, but definitely skeptical, because the skepticism that they were experiencing was, I have a process that works. I have great reviews, and they did. They had great reviews from senior leadership, was really bought into, was in great service delivery. My process works. And I wasn't there to tell them their process didn't work. What I did want to do was challenge a belief that they were coming to the table with, which was that it was the end users, that the end user was to blame for why the process had such high rejection rates. And I didn't even come right out and say, I don't believe that fault lays entirely on one side or the other. What I said was, what I would like you to do is give me some time to not only interview, but bring some people in for a co-creation session. We'll do some user journey mapping. We'll do some persona development. And I would ask you if you're comfortable, and if they're comfortable having you sit in on the session, I would love for you to hear how they're experiencing it from their perspective. And this person, and I will say, like, was an excellent client. They were, like I said, skeptical about why it is that their process wasn't delivering the way it needed to deliver, but they were definitely open to working to come up with, because it wasn't working well. So understanding why it wasn't working well from the user's perspective, if they were at least open enough to try and see what it was that how they could help the client do, or rather their end user do better. And I thought, well, you know what? I can work with that. And so very early in the process, we brought about 20 people into the room, their key stakeholders, and we heard them. They were shown the process as it was on paper, and they were asked to weigh in on it. They were asked about their pain points and joy points. They were asked to share some of their stories. They were asked to create some personas. And actually, we had them work on personas that were not only true to their experiences, but also to weigh in on and help develop some that weren't just about themselves. So all that to say, after about 4 hours of working together, we walked out with a new set of journey maps, a new set of persona, but also a very incredible amount of insights as to what it was like. And one of those key insights was that there was not a single stakeholder in the room who had ever actually seen the process that as it was on paper. And this is the most important point, how many things they had to do, how many other processes they had to actually manage and deal with before they even came to dealing with my client. And so basically, my client turned to me and said, I need to make this less stressful for them. I need to make this easier. I need this to be a better experience, and I want to do it with them. And to this day, this is one of my favorite client stories because it was their openness to challenge their own skepticism that created this possibility. They were open to bridging what many people face, which is an empathy gap. So if you're coming from a perspective, you have information that says, hey, this works for me, you aren't going to see it from their frustration. You're not going to see it from their perspective. If you can close empathy gaps, you're going to be better able to create solutions that work. So for internal process, especially, focus on bringing both sides together early and creating some of that empathy that may be lacking or may be hard to get to. And at the end of the day, there's an incredible set of research that was done. It was an incredible meta review that was done by Eyal and colleagues in 2018. And it basically said, stop trying to take perspective and go talk to people. As much as we'd like to practice empathy, at the end of the day, there is no substitution for going and talking to the people who are impacted. And if you are a client or a service designer or a product designer, and you're trying to make something that works, you have to talk to the people. As much as we are creative and innovative people who really do want to make things better, they're going to have different ideas and takes on it that, if you hear them, will inevitably lead to better solutions. So what is something you could do different today? This is a practice called looking in the mirror. It's a reframing device. So whenever you're trying to understand challenges, and if you have things like egocentrism bias, or if you're dealing with an empathy gap, it can be very, very hard to see the role that you may be playing in the challenge. So if you want to, you could do something like I said, like I did, create a pain points and joy points workshop, do some user persona. Like, you could do this, and it's a very quick win as well. But again, from the perspective of owning our own behaviors, look in the mirror. Take a look back at the last 2 to 3 challenges that you've encountered in your design process. Aim to identify what role you played in making it more challenging. Make a plan for integrating this reframe the next time you find yourself encountering other barriers or challenges. Do different today. Look in the mirror. Even if all you own is 5% of that challenge, that's a quite empowering number that you can own and do something with to make things work better. Long term, you can look at developing and prioritizing co-design processes. So Kellyanne McGurcher wrote this incredible book called, it's not long, so if you're looking for a light summer read, I highly recommend it. It's got some heavy ideas, but it is shorter. She writes, the book's called Beyond Sticky Notes, and in it, it's all about co-design. And she has this quote: if we want our systems to produce better outcomes for people they serve, we need different relationships between professionals and communities. And it's giving us lots of practical resources to do exactly that: co-design, co-creation, bringing in people, understanding that people who are marginalized groups or who have marginalized voices are going to have barriers to participate that we may not even know about. So she's giving a lot of resources that will help us to do co-design well. So at the end of the day, this is about enhancing your product and service by integrating collaborative problem solving into your key decision touch points, starting from a perspective of the priority is to bring people into the space. And without further ado, we are arriving at our destination. So we have created our first, pit stop. Our first landmark was all about creating a foundation of understanding. Our second piece in this, and filling in the gaps in our puzzle pieces, was all about looking to show, don't tell accountability, showing people, not telling them they're wrong or telling them you're right, not trying to fill in the gap for them where empathy gaps may be present, but instead showing them the difference they can make. Well, if you've done those first 2 pieces, you're well on your way to your final destination for today, which is sustainable design leadership. This is a big change for those of you who are in the expert space or who may be process owners or design owners and product owners, and you're looking to move from a space of not only making good products, but making sustainable and taking sustainable action and making sustainable decisions for the long term, for your company, for the people you serve. And so this is all about making things better for the long run. And one of the big things about sustainable design, you see this come up, you may have heard regenerative design, it ties into this as well. But basically, sustainable design is about creating things that last. And the emphasis I want to add to here, similar to how when we were talking about foundational understanding starts with a foundational understanding of you and your role in the system, then moving into the space of understanding your user. Well, sustainable leadership is about recognizing that sustainable design means having sustainability with your designers. It means that we work in such a way as designers, we work in such a way to ensure our own sustainability. So while I also do a lot of work around and ensure that every single process I have is about creating not only short-term wins, but long-term solutions that are going to bring organizations and teams and individuals where they need to go long-term. But I want to do it in a way that respects my own sustainability. So why this matters. This is about the problem is the reward UX designer. This person, you can probably see some early indications of this person in the first persona, which was all about the all-in researcher. So this person is the person who falls in love with problems and doesn't necessarily care about external reward. They're highly rewarded by the work itself. This is the person who is just, let me solve this problem, and I'm on to the next thing. Maybe they don't take a lot of time to look for recognition. Maybe they're actually very quick to pass on recognition for better problems. They're like, hey, if you let me work on this, that you can have the credit, for example. Or if you are in the space of the problem is the reward UX designer, maybe you're somebody who is likely to not only be uncomfortable with credit or recognition, but you will take every problem that goes past your door because you don't know when that next problem is coming. And so one of the big cognitive biases at play here is scarcity bias. So scarcity bias is a bias that plays into the space of that which is more rare is better. So you will see this, oh, only one left. Oh, only 3 more. If you call now, that kind of thing. So when we think that something is rare, we want it more. So if you think, oh, this is the only time I'll ever get to work on this problem, as a problem is the reward UX designer, you're always going to want to jump on that problem. What that means, though, is you can end up with a highly overburdened plate. You may end up having way too much on the go. You may have very little room for rest, very little room for reward, very little room for joy. So sustainable design leadership is all about reintroducing those concepts. Build in prioritization. What does this look like now? It's system syncing and management. It's understanding you're part of that system. And when you manage the system, you have to manage yourself well. You have to manage your resource and effort. You have to manage and advocate for your needs. And that can be very uncomfortable. Ironically, many of us work in the space of needs identification. But if you ask a crowded room of people, how many of you have had the conversation about what you need to do your job well? Very few people put their hands up. Normalizing sustainable design leadership is about normalizing the concept that we all have needs and that we need to have those needs met to perform well and to be sustainable in our design practices. Knowledge and skills transfer. So moving from a silo of excellence into I build bridges. I look for opportunities to transfer my knowledge, to build skills in others. I'm not here to solve your problem. I'm here to empower you with process tools and resources to solve your own problems. I'm not afraid. There will always be more problems to solve. There will always be another wicked challenge. This is not a one-off sale that I need to run into and solve before time expires. In fact, by being able to be more selective about the problems that I focus on when it comes to my own leadership and my own design, then I actually create better solutions long term. I practice lessons learned in an ongoing way, and I have built in recognition practices for myself and for my team. Because at the end of the day, when you design something that works well and makes people's lives better and makes your, the clients you serve, that makes the end user have a better time, you need to recognize that win, because in recognizing that win, you're more likely to replicate that win. And fundamentally, as much as scarcity bias could make us jump at every problem when we're a problem as the reward UX designer, similarly, scarcity bias works in our favor. By choosing to work on fewer problems, but work on them well, we actually become much better, and rather we develop a much stronger brand and reputation because we are being more selective, and we create better things by prioritizing our effort. So what can you do differently today? Do different today by embracing your discomfort and celebrating your wins. So if the idea of public recognition makes you uncomfortable, first off, I want to let you know you're not alone. There was some research done back in 2017-18, Littlefields. He explained he studied about 500 people in various businesses and was asking the question, does recognition make you uncomfortable? And what he found was about 70% of people were uncomfortable with public recognition. So you're not alone. You're not special if you think, oh, recognition, that's uncomfortable. But if you want to build a sustainable design practice and want to lead sustainable design in your company, recognition helps for you to get credibility. It helps you to build your reputation. It helps for more people to understand the value of playing in this space well. So as much as we want to be scarce when it comes to the amount of problems we try to solve, we still do need to be seen and we need to be recognized. And now, that is not to say we need to be publicly recognized. Recognition needs to play to your comfort as well. So we're going to be a little uncomfortable here, but we're not going to be fully uncomfortable all the time. So there may be ways in which you can privately or less publicly celebrate your wins. And that is the commit here. If you haven't done it, please sit back. We've all been through it in the last couple of years. Sit back, celebrate a win. And I want you to not only ask yourself, what did you do? But how was it that your skills and your knowledge were pivotal to supporting the win? So it complements the last point about reframing to understand how you might be contributing to challenges or barriers. Here, now, what is the unique thing that you're bringing to solving the win? Commit to share your win with a colleague or someone who would want to share in your success. This might be the harder part of that, but there are a lot of people who want to share in your wins. We have spent a lot of time in the last couple of years sharing hearing bad news stories. And you've probably heard this before. If it bleeds, it reads. The idea that negative news is Well, is the news we pay attention to. And there's truth in that. The change that we could do different today is to start to popularize and bring in those good news stories, because the fact is, if we want to be sustainable, we need more good news stories in our lives. The last recommendation for long-term improvement in our journey towards sustainable design leadership is about prioritizing your effort with your North Star. So a good friend of mine in the last year recently introduced me to this idea of defining and choosing your work according to your purpose or North Star. Maybe you have a North Star statement. This is how you want to work, why you want to work. It really is about your purpose, why you do the work you do. In my case, my purpose is about exactly what I've talked to you about today. I believe that there are real answers out there to some of the world's most wicked, complex challenges, that the only way we are going to solve them is by co-creating solutions for real people with real people, and empowering and building those people up to make something for our future that will last long beyond me, well beyond you. The point is that if we look to some of the most complex challenges we're facing today, that is exactly the kind of answers and solutions that we need. Sustainable, co-created, based in a foundation of understanding and compassion. That is my North Star. Maybe your North Star looks like something different. Whatever it is, prioritize your efforts, solve the problems, make yourself scarce to solve the problems that matter according to your North Star. And as tired as you may be after the last couple of years, you're going to start to find that you are getting more energized and more engaged accordingly as you choose to do fewer things that matter. So I recommend here checking out this idea of giving good no. Some of us are very uncomfortable saying no, but the more you do it, the less uncomfortable you'll be, but the more time you're going to have for yourself to do what matters. So with that, this is my UX journey. You've met a few personas along the way. You've hopefully taken away the importance from a foundational understanding, the importance of leading with questions and adopting a reframe practice that helps to challenge some of our cognitive biases, including a confirmation bias. That you've, when we come to that landmark or that pit stop around show, don't tell accountability, that you've learned the importance of leading with compassion. When it comes to the idea that if you're coming in to be right or to fail to see the other side, you're never going to be able to co-create. So we've got to build a bridge and get beyond being right towards being effective, and to hopefully bridge some of those empathy gaps in the process. And at the end of the day, really, it is not about trying to imagine someone else's perspective. It's about listening to their perspective by getting them in the room. So show the value when you're dealing with a resistant client, show the value of working in this way with quick wins that demonstrate proof of concept and create alignment between you, the client, as well as the end user. Finally, in sustainable design, we're looking to lead with values and from self-value. You are part of a system for sustainable design, and as such, you deserve to work in a way that is sustainable. Align your commitment accordingly. So with that, please take some words from Vernon Howard and always walk through life as if you have something new to learn. I hope you've learned something new today. We've come in with some questions. We have time for some new questions, but always walk through life as if you have something new to learn, and you will continue to walk through life with curiosity and joy. Thank you so much for your time. Let's keep this conversation going, and please feel free to reach out and let's chat. Thank you.
If you want to see more events like this, make sure to check the upcoming ones at expressia.eventbrite.com or check the recordings we've got on this channel. Take care, and I will see you around.